Hello, I'm Erin Thay, a Masters in Education student at the University of Northampton. In this video, I'll be sharing my research, a cross-cultural study of Malaysia and England exploring early years educators' well-being and the influence of early years leadership. Come along on this journey as we unpick well-being in the early years sector and look at how leadership influences the well-being of early years educators across these two contexts. See, I'm originally from Malaysia, where I began my journey in early years education. For the past 3 years, I've been working in a nursery here in England, experiencing early years settings in both countries has really opened my eyes to the well-being of early years educators specifically, on the cross-cultural factors that influence it and the influence of leadership on it. Right now, the early years sector is facing a global staffing shortage, something we're clearly seeing in both England and Malaysia, according to the Early Years Alliance 2023 and Shamini et al. 2024. This has made me deeply passionate about exploring how leadership can influence well-being in meaningful and sustainable ways. This research is guided by 4 key research questions. As we move forward, keep these in mind. We'll revisit them throughout the video. 1. What is the difference between early years educators' well-being in Malaysia and England, based on the Staff Wellbeing Index? 2. How do early years educators in England and Malaysia define well-being, and can a comprehensive definition be developed from it? 3. What factors influence the well-being of early years educators in England and Malaysia, and how does leadership influence well-being? 4. What evidence-based valuing practices can leaders adopt to enhance well-being policies and retain early years educators? With our research questions introduced, let's now turn to the pre-existing voices and ideas that have already shaped this topic and enter the literature review. So, what is well-being? Well, well-being is generally understood as the quality of people's lives and their life satisfaction, but it's more than just happiness or health. Statham and Chase 2010 and the World Health Organization describes it as both subjective and objective, how we experience life and how our circumstances compare to societal norms. Felch and Perry 1995 and Gable and Height 2005 have expressed the need for a definition due to the lack of literature on the early years in terms of well-being. Exploring early years educators' voices and their own definitions will allow to tackle both these disparities. Well-being is often confused with related concepts. While often used interchangeably, mental health is just one part of well-being, which also includes physical, emotional, social aspects. And in the Journal of Happiness by Cummins 2010, his work on subjective well-being homeostasis highlights that well-being is a multidimensional and dynamic construct, arguing that the universally accepted definition remains elusive due to its personal, cultural, and contextual variability. However, schools and institutions recognize that the lack of a definition is a challenge and there is no way to measure well-being. This is especially challenging when institutions need to show improvement in terms of well-being, as highlighted by William Browns and Madner 2021. So various factors could potentially influence early years educators' well-being, and this study will allow highlighting these factors so that educators can design effective interventions or practices to support them. Modern research by Pollard and Lee 2003, Fott and Thompson 2009, Statham and Chase 2010 identifies 8 domains of well-being in the context of early years settings: health, both physical and mental, career development, faith and spirituality, leadership, job role, work, environment, pay, and relationships. This research has identified 3 prominent domains which will be the focus of the literature review. First, pay deserves attention, not only as a financial matter, but as a symbol of professional worth and stability. Economic well-being is fundamental to workforce stability, yet early years educators in both Malaysia and England remain significantly underpaid, reflecting a lack of societal and policy appreciation for the sector. In England, the average annual salary of £26,608 sits below many other graduate professions, while in Malaysia, educators earn only £5,806.60 per year, an even starker disparity when measured against professional responsibility. Although Malaysia's lower cost of living partially offsets its lower wages, this framing risks normalizing inadequate pay rather than recognizing the high skill and societal importance of early years education. The persistent undervaluing of early years work is not merely an economic issue, but a structural one, rooted in the gender devaluation of care and a failure to align pay with responsibility, expertise, and impact on long-term social mobility. Mental health emerges as a silent crisis in early years education, exposing the human toll of low pay, high pressure, and little recognition. The COVID-19 pandemic intensified global attention on mental health, yet it also exposed how deeply entrenched systemic neglect remains, particularly for vulnerable groups such as young people and women, as said by WHO 2022. This neglect is sharply visible in the early years education, a sector dominated by women who are disproportionately affected by poor workplace mental health. Despite growing awareness, access to mental health services remain low in both Malaysia of 29% and England 39%, as said by the Ministry of Health Malaysia 2020 and the NHS 2016. For early years educators, this gap is especially concerning. They are tasked with supporting children's emotional well-being while their own needs are routinely sidelined. Yet, research rarely interrogates how educators themselves navigate or prioritize mental health within broader well-being, particularly across contrasting cultural contexts such as Malaysia and England. This silence reflects a wider undervaluation of the profession, where the sustainability of the workforce is undermined by policy neglect. Leadership is therefore not just desirable, but essential in embedding a culture of well-being. Without it, efforts to retain and support the workforce risk being little more than rhetorical. Religious and spiritual beliefs strongly shape identity, morality, and well-being across culture, as said by Day 2017. In Malaysia, this is formalized through Malaysia's national philosophy, also known as the Rukun Negara, established in the aftermath of the 1969 racial riots, which places belief in God as a core national value. Growing up, I remember reciting it in school, reinforcing faith's role in personal and national identity. With 63.5% of Malaysians identifying as Muslim and only 1.8% as non-religious, as said by the Department of Statistics Malaysia 2020, showing the successful implementation of the Rukun Negara. Religion is a unifying force, but can marginalize non-religious views. In contrast, England's more secular and diverse belief landscape, where 37.2% are non-religious, as said by the Office for National Statistics 2022. This supports individual autonomy and interest in alternative spiritual practices like mindfulness and nature-based rituals, which is arising. This is reflected in the British values, as it is more secular in nature with no explicit references to God or religion, as said by the Department for Education 2014. Faith is respected under the principle of tolerance of different beliefs, but it is not foundational as a part of the values themselves. Emphasis is on individual freedom and social cohesion, allowing religious expression without imposing it as a national moral guide. And these differences highlight the need for culturally sensitive leadership and mental health strategies that balance religion's potential to both unite and divide. This contrasting socio-cultural values of England and Malaysia, rooted in individualism and collectivism, shape distinct approaches to well-being and leadership in early years education. In England, emotional authenticity is often linked to personal integrity and mental health, while in Malaysia, emotional restraint is seen as a virtue that preserves family reputation and group harmony, as said by Tamir et al. 2024 and the Ministry of Health Malaysia 2019. This cultural divergence influences how educators experience and express well-being. Hochschild's 1983 concept of emotional labor is relevant across both these contexts, where professionals often suppress emotions to maintain a caring facade. Crucially, Tamir et al. 2024 found that while expressive suppression can harm well-being in individualistic cultures like England, it actually enhances it in collectivist ones such as Malaysia, highlighting the cultural relativity of emotional regulation. Understanding these dynamics is essential for designing inclusive, contextually relevant well-being strategies. Leadership styles in early years education are deeply shaped by cultural foundations. In Malaysia, leadership tends to be hierarchical and authoritative, as research by Ansari et al. 2004 has found that participative leadership approaches are often misinterpreted, potentially due to multicultural and multilingual nature of Malaysia. In contrast, England favors democratic and transparent leadership driven by open communication and performance feedback, as said by Cooley 2025. As Bronfenbrenner's ecological system theory 1979 suggests, these socio-cultural variables critically shape both individual experiences and institutional practices, including how well-being is supported. Azila Gabetor et al. 2024 shows that positive leadership improves staff well-being, but its effectiveness depends on cultural context and institutional support, highlighting the need for tailored leadership strategies in the earlier settings. Valuing practices, which is defined as everyday actions and behaviors that leaders engage in to make their staff feel appreciated and recognized by Izzat White 2009, are central to positive leadership. While England benefits from statutory frameworks such as safeguarding laws, Malaysia does lack a national policy on staff well-being. However, grassroots efforts like mental health first aid are emerging, highlighting a growing awareness and the need for responsive leadership strategies. Next up, methodology. Or simply put, the game plan of collecting data in this study. Like Tower Bridge linking two sides, this study bridges objective and subjective dimensions of well-being through a mixed methods approach reflecting a pragmatist stance, as said by Cherry Holmes 1992 and Robson 2024. This was achieved through two complementary data collection methods, an online questionnaire and an online journal. The use of online tools effectively accommodated the geographical distance and time zone differences between the two countries, enhancing accessibility and participation, supported by McCombie et al. 2024. However, reliance on digital platforms may have introduced some limitations, such as varying levels of digital literacy, inconsistent internet access, reflected by Hassan Tinmaz et al. 2022, and reduced opportunities for richer face-to-face interactions, supported by Newby 2014, which could have influenced the depth and quality of the data collected. Before data was collected, all participants provided informed consent and the right to withdraw before analysis was carried out. Transparency was central to this research, with participants fully informed of the study's objectives before taking part, and provided a clear rationale for using a video format, such as this one, to disseminate findings. This approach not only met ethical requirements, but also reinforced trust, ensured informed consent, and demonstrated accountability in communicating the outcomes. Concurrently, all data has been securely stored within my password-protected university email system in accordance with England and Malaysia's legislation, the General Data Protection Regulation, UK's Data Protection Act 2018, and Malaysia's Personal Data Protection Act 2010. Questions were carefully selected and piloted. However, participants were given their researchers' and supervisors' contact details, along with mental health helplines, as a duty of care in case of distress or harm arising from participation. So the two-part questionnaire was designed to comprehensively address all the research questions. Part 2 was a self-evaluation of well-being levels using the Staff Wellbeing Index. This index was adapted from the validated Personal Wellbeing Index by the International Wellbeing Group 2019, where participants ranked their satisfaction levels from 0 to 10 across 7, or the optional faith and spirituality as the 8th domain. This questionnaire was available in both Malay and English, ensuring research materials was understood by participants in their preferred language. A total of 42 early years educators participated in this questionnaire phase, including 13 from England and 29 from Malaysia, providing a meaningful cross-national comparison. However, the imbalance in participant numbers between the two countries presented a limitation, as it may influence the representativeness and the generalizability of the comparative findings. As for the online journal, it proved to be an effective method for gathering qualitative data, as it encouraged participants to engage in thoughtful reflection. This approach provided rich personal insights into factors influencing their well-being, positive moments in their day-to-day work within earlier settings, and how support from leadership practices shape that well-being. Research by Smith et al. 2018 found that online journaling can also enhance well-being by helping individuals regulate their emotions and reduce distress. This was carried out for a 3-week period where 4 participants, 2 from each country, took part in this online journal. While online journaling offered flexibility and their time to reflect, it lacked the interactive and probing qualities of interviews. Without real-time engagement, there were fewer opportunities to clarify responses, explore emerging themes in greater depth, or adapt questions based on the participants' input. Nevertheless, the quiet and reflective nature of journaling encouraged open expression, especially on a sensitive topic such as well-being. Compared to interviews, it was also more time efficient, removing the need for transcription. Overall, online journaling not only complemented the questionnaire data, but also provided valuable context for interpreting the findings. This method aligns closely with the study's focus on subjective well-being, which emphasizes individual perceptions and lived experiences, said by Cummins 2010. For ethical reasons, the online journal Padlet has been destroyed upon the completion of this research. For more information on ethical considerations, please refer to the appendix attached on the Padlet link. We will now dive into the analysis and findings of quantitative data obtained from the online questionnaires answering research question 1 and 3. So the Staff Wellbeing Index was calculated from questionnaire responses where participants rated their satisfaction across key life domains: their role, pay, health, environment, relationships, career development, leadership, and the optional faith and spirituality. This was rated on a 0 to 10 scale, as reflected in the validated Personal Wellbeing Index. The overall Staff Wellbeing Index of the early years in Malaysia and England was calculated as the average of these ratings. So the Staff Wellbeing Index is calculated by taking the raw score, dividing it by n times 10, where the raw score equals to the total score from the relevant items and n equals the number of items, usually 7 or 8 if the optional faith and spirituality is included. Malaysia scored an average Staff Wellbeing Index of 76 amongst 29 participants, and England scored an average Staff Wellbeing Index of only 67.75 amongst 13 participants. This shows that early years educators in Malaysia have higher well-being than early years educators in England based on the Staff Wellbeing Index. When asked to prioritize well-being domains, participants in both Malaysia and England ranked mental health as a top priority. Pay, however, was ranked lowest in Malaysia, whereas in England it was placed 6 out of 7 domains. This findings was echoed in the Staff Wellbeing Index results, where pay received the lowest satisfaction score amongst Malaysian participants. In contrast, participants in England ranked faith and spirituality as the lowest priority. Interestingly, those who chose to respond to the optional faith and spirituality item in the Staff Wellbeing Index reported the highest satisfaction score amongst both these domains. So does leadership influence well-being? Well, 74% of participants actually answered yes, that leadership does in fact influence well-being, while 21% answered no, saying that leadership does not influence their well-being. This shows that the majority feel leadership has an impact on their well-being. Now let's look into the qualitative data, which adopted Braun and Clark's 2006 thematic analysis steps, or what I would like to call the puzzle analysis, through the 6 steps of analysis. The qualitative questions obtained from both the online questionnaire and online journal, there were similar puzzles and codes that were identified. This then allowed to search for a common theme and build our subsections of the puzzles. These puzzles fit together to create 6 themes: communication, leadership, physical health, emotional health, mental health, and workload management. We will now dive into the themes and how it answered the research questions. This section shares the findings from the questionnaire on how participants defined well-being. Each response was treated like a puzzle piece. Physical and mental health were the highest emerging themes from participants in Malaysia and England when defining well-being, followed by emotion, happiness, relationships, and their job role or purpose. Participant 8 from England defined well-being as a holistic overview of oneself, encompassing physical, mental, emotional health, and also influenced by their job. Participant 19 from Malaysia shared a similar view with well-being, an overall view of the health and happiness encompassing physical, mental, emotional, relational, and job satisfaction, and highlights a clear link between educators' well-being to the children's progress in their growth and development. Together, these codes suggest that well-being is a multidimensional construct encompassing physical, mental, emotional, specifically happiness, relationships, while also being shaped by their job role and sense of purpose, yet remaining uniquely experienced by each individual. Now for the research question 4, we look into top 3 valuing practices with the highest frequencies found from the online journal. First, listening and communication. This theme captured communication and the power of listening to early years educators as a valuing practice. The hands-on practitioner reported how communication through meetings, discussions with leaders have an impact on staff relationships. The art teacher, on the other hand, explained that at times they did not feel like what they said was taken seriously, feeling like their job role as an art teacher did not significantly affect children's well-being. This shows that at times communication between early years educators and leaders can be both negative and positive. Through positive listening and communication, there is a difference in staff's emotional well-being. The next theme is distributed leadership. This theme presents the leadership type that can facilitate in positive well-being practices through the distributed leader. The hands-on practitioner noted a distributed leader as a leader that collaborates and gives new ideas. The shy cat agreed to, but noticed a shift in her leader who multitasks and shows some signs of burning out. This theme shows that shared leadership amongst the team not only builds relationships with educators, but also offers new ideas, motivating early years educators and boosting well-being. The next theme is workload management. This theme captured the direct link between workload and early years educators' mental health. Early years educators' workload affects their mental health as it causes them to feel pressured and overwhelmed. The emerging leader highlighted the staffing crisis and how it impacts early years educators feeling overwhelmed with the workload. The art teacher offered a different lens through the eyes of an early years educator's art teacher who also linked workload to anxiety. This shows that the staffing crisis is evident as early years educators face heavy workloads and deadlines while also needing to prioritize the children within their care, which leads them feeling overwhelmed and anxious, impacting their well-being. Now comes the exciting part, the discussion. This is where the puzzle pieces come together, linking our research to the bigger picture. First, let's look into the Staff Wellbeing Index scores and what this indicates. So Malaysia scored an average Staff Wellbeing Index of 76, and this score falls within the normal well-being range. This suggests that on average, participants in Malaysia experience moderately high well-being. England scored an average Staff Wellbeing Index of 67.75, and this actually falls within the compromise range and is notably lower than Malaysia's score. It indicates lower well-being among participants in England with a greater degree of compromise compared to Malaysia. This suggests that respondents in England are not fully flourishing in terms of well-being. These findings align with existing literature, which indicates that a smaller proportion of individuals in Malaysia report experiencing mental health difficulties and seek treatment compared to England. Malaysia's higher Staff Wellbeing Index suggests relatively better overall satisfaction across life domains compared to England. However, literature by Tamer et al. 2024 could also suggest this as a form of expressive suppression of well-being by participants from Malaysia, rating their well-being higher due to family or community pressure. The lower reporting and treatment rates in Malaysia may reflect cultural stigma, limited awareness, or reduced accessibility of mental health services, rather than genuinely higher well-being. A significant majority of participants, 74%, reported that leadership influenced their well-being. This aligns with Azila Gabetor et al. 2024, who highlights the strong link between positive leadership practices and improved staff well-being. However, a smaller proportion, 21%, indicated no such impact. Despite this recognition, leadership was ranked only 5th in importance by participants from England and 6th by those in Malaysia, suggesting that while leadership is acknowledged as influential, it may not be perceived as the most pressing determinant of well-being when compared to other factors. This discrepancy underscores the complex and context-dependent nature of leadership's role in earlier settings, where workplace culture and leadership styles interact with other influences such as workload, pay, and personal circumstances. The minority view may stem from experiences of leadership that are neutral or simply ineffective, or from a belief that well-being is shaped more by factors outside leadership's direct control. The online journal revealed how early years leaders directly shape educators' well-being by influencing the emotional, professional, and practical work environment. Valuing practice, as outlined by Isaac White 2009, included listening, communication, workload management, and inclusive team building. This was closely linked in this research to staff motivation, stress, retention, and job satisfaction. Now let's look at the standout findings. When asked to prioritize well-being domains, participants in both Malaysia and England identified mental health as the top priority, indicating a shared recognition as its central role in overall well-being. This shared prioritization suggests a recognition of importance aligns with the broader global shifts in attitudes towards mental health, particularly following the COVID-19 pandemic, highlighted by the United Nations. The COVID-19 pandemic significantly heightened awareness of mental health issues, particularly amongst vulnerable groups such as young people and women. This is reflected in the present study where over 95% of questionnaire responses were from women, consistent with the gendered nature of the earlier sector, which remains a female-dominated profession. This highlights the importance of incorporating gendered perspectives in discussions of well-being. While the COVID-19 crisis fostered greater openness and destigmatization around mental health, this study has shown that early years educators are still not likely to seek well-being support from their leadership.
This study has shown that early years educators in England are still not likely to seek well-being support from their leadership and management, with only 15.4% very likely and 7.7% somewhat likely. In contrast, Malaysian educators are more inclined to seek support, with 31% very likely and 38% somewhat likely. This challenges Tamer et al.'s 2024 assertion that collectivist cultures suppress emotional expression, suggesting that Malaysian educators are more open to seeking support.
Both countries face a workforce crisis, and this research has found that 15% of participants plan to leave early years within the next 5 years, while 46% of participants in England and 52% of participants in Malaysia are still unsure. This substantiates literature by Shamimi et al. And the Early Years Alliance, as the crisis is likely to continue due to early years educators' well-being. Still, support systems remain fragmented. Given the strong link between staff well-being, job performance, and retention, as said by Liu Yu and Shan 2022, leadership must move beyond awareness to action. Stress and burnout in the early years sector are closely tied to low pay and undervaluation. Chronic financial strain is well established as a predictor of poor mental health outcomes, including anxiety and depression. In Malaysia, pay was consistently ranked as the lowest priority, and similarly, it was placed 6 out of 7 domains in England. Yet it also received the lowest satisfaction scores on the Staff Wellbeing Index, indicating a disconnect between perceived importance and lived experiences. This suggests that while early years educators may not prioritize pay, it still holds significant weight in their overall well-being. These findings reflect a broader systemic underappreciation of the profession, echoing concerns raised by Malaysia's Fung et al. 2018 and England's Social Mobility Commission 2020, who link low pay to high turnover in the early years sector both in England and Malaysia. Feeling valued and recognized came up frequently in the qualitative data, indicating that early years educators' satisfaction comes from feeling appreciated rather than just being paid well. Isaac White 2009's term of valuing practices echoes the role of leaders in supporting, communicating, and recognizing staff's achievement to make them feel valued and appreciated. However, recognition of early years educators' well-being goes beyond action and behaviors of leaders. It also extends to how children, parents, and the wider community value and acknowledge staff contributions. A new and recent example is the inclusion of early years educators in August 2024 as eligible members of the Blue Light Card scheme here in England, which provides discounts on everyday purchases in recognition of key community workers. While this signals an important step in publicly acknowledging early years educators as essential contributors, it raises a critical question. Is this recognition sufficient, or does it risk masking deeper structural inequalities? The symbolic gesture of offering discounts may inadvertently normalize the modest pay of educators, framing them as deserving of financial relief rather than addressing the root issue of low salaries and professional undervaluation. In this sense, while eligibility for the Blue Light Card is justified as a token of appreciation, it can also be critiqued as insufficient, potentially reinforcing the narrative that early years work should remain underpaid and reliant on external perks rather than equitable pay. This lack of appreciation leaves early years educators stressed, burnt out, resulting in high turnover and has a lasting effect on children, ultimately undermining consistent, high-quality care for children. According to the attachment theory, such instability can hinder children's emotional and social development, compromising the quality of their care, as said by Bowlby, 1958. Faith communities often emphasize values such as service, care, and vocation, which can make low pay more tolerable or even normalized, where they are doing it for the children rather than a financial reward. This may partly explain why participants rank pay low in importance despite its scoring poorly on satisfaction. Religious and spiritual beliefs are influential cultural forces that shape identity, moral development, and well-being across societies, as said by Day 2017. This influence is reflected in well-being priorities. Malaysian participants ranked faith and spirituality highly, underscoring their central role in personal and communal well-being. The Rukun Negara, Malaysia's national philosophy, has been deeply embedded into the social fabric through formal education. Its first principle, belief in God, reflects the centrality of faith in national identity and moral development. 100% of participants in Malaysia selected the optional faith and spirituality domain in the Staff Wellbeing Index. However, only 46% included faith and spirituality as an influencing domain to their well-being in England. This was reiterated as England ranked faith and spirituality lowest. However, English participants who did value faith, it was actually their greatest source of satisfaction. Even so, the emerging leader from England mentioned how Bible and prayer had a positive impact in the online journal. This contrast highlights how overall rankings can hide strong individual and cultural differences, and why minority values should not be overlooked in well-being research. These mixed responses among participants in England complicates the development of universal well-being models, underscoring the need for culturally adaptive approaches that reconcile collective traditions with individual spiritual needs. Without such balance, well-being strategies risk privileging dominant culture norms and overlooking minority perspectives, thereby limiting their inclusivity and effectiveness. Malaysia, on the other hand, would benefit from a national well-being model due to their collective importance of faith and spirituality on their well-being. The findings of this study supports Cummins' 2010 view of well-being as a dynamic and multidimensional construct and builds on the World Health Organization's 2012 assertion that it is both objective and subjective, supported through this mixed methods approach. The findings reveal that well-being is culturally and contextually shaped, and based on this, the following definition of well-being has been developed for early years educators in this study.
The well-being of early years educators is a holistic concept that encompasses both objective and subjective domains, reflecting an individual's overall experience of happiness, health, and life satisfaction. Common elements include physical, mental, emotional, social, and economic health, faith and spirituality, a sense of purpose, and meaningful relationships. Each person's well-being is shaped by their unique values, priorities, and life context.
I'll be sharing the key conclusions and recommendations from my research on educator well-being in early years education, drawing on findings from both Malaysia and from England. This study highlights the complex and multidimensional nature of educators' well-being across two culturally distinct contexts, Malaysia and England. Although a comprehensive definition was aimed to be developed, the definition developed highlights that well-being is not a uniform construct, but one that it is deeply personal and mediated by cultural, gendered, and spiritual values. This complexity demands that policies move beyond a generic one-size-fits-all approach, and the quantitative data indicated that Malaysian educators reported higher levels of well-being, 76 on the Staff Wellbeing Index within the normal range, whereas English educators scored a lower 67.75 within the compromise range. Yet beneath these numerical differences, common challenges surface across both contexts, particularly around mental health, pressures, and persistent issues of low pay. While 74% of participants acknowledge leadership as central to well-being, this figure also suggests that a quarter of educators may not view leadership as the defining influence, highlighting the need to consider additional structural and cultural factors. Findings across both contexts demonstrate that communication, recognition, workload management, and inclusion are not merely managerial add-ons, but critical determinants of how supported, valued, and emotionally secure educators feel in their roles. Instead, well-being initiatives must be flexible, inclusive, and contextually responsive if they are to address both the systemic undervaluation of early years work and the everyday realities faced by educators. So, what does this mean for practice? Based on the findings, I propose 3 key recommendations for leaders and policymakers in early years education. 1. Embed emotional and mental well-being into leadership practice. This study affirms that compassionate leadership enhances trust, authenticity, and psychological safety, yet its effectiveness depends on balance. Leaders who remain alert to emotional, physical, and interpersonal cues, and who create safe spaces for open dialogue, foster empathy and cohesion, as said by Barron et al. 2021 and Edmondson 2019. However, the findings also highlight that compassion must not blur professional boundaries or weaken accountability. A dual approach combining emotional attentiveness with clarity, constructive feedback, and consistent decision-making can support both staff well-being and high-quality educational practices. 2. Implement fair, inclusive, and distributed leadership structures. Distributed leadership emerged as a key practice for reducing burnout and fostering ownership. Grounded in the social learning theory by Lave and Wenger, 1991, shared leadership enables educators to develop competence and contribute meaningfully to decision-making, as said by Nadeem, 2024. Participant reflections such as the Shy Cat's call for collaboration and the hands-on practitioner's appreciation of problem-solving illustrates its potential to strengthen reciprocity and trust. Yet literature on distributed leadership remains limited, and structural barriers may inhibit genuine shared practice. By recognizing these limitations, this study provides empirical evidence that socially grounded distributed leadership strengthens competence, well-being, and collective responsibility, offering a more robust foundation for inclusive leadership policies. Third is to design culturally responsive and individualized well-being frameworks. Findings emphasize that well-being is deeply personal, shaped by cultural, gendered, and spiritual values. This challenge of the adequacy of universal policies. Models such as the Wellbeing Rainbow adapted from Dahlgren and Whitehead, 1991, provides a flexible framework that recognizes diverse influences and priorities. Such frameworks enhance equity by allowing leaders to support varied needs, from spirituality to gendered-specific concerns. However, broad frameworks risk diluting focus and neglecting urgent issues. When applied critically, the Wellbeing Rainbow model offers a structured yet adaptable tool for balancing inclusivity with targeted and impactful well-being support. Together, these recommendations highlight that educator well-being cannot be secured through surface-level recognition or one-size-fits-all initiatives. Instead, it requires leadership that is both compassionate and rigorous, structures that distribute responsibility fairly, and frameworks that reflect cultural and personal diversity. Implemented critically, these strategies can strengthen educators' well-being, enhance professional recognition, and ultimately contribute to sustainable, high-quality early years provision. Together, these recommendations point to a clear message. Early years educators' well-being cannot be secured through symbolic gestures or surface-level recognition. It calls for compassionate, yet rigorous leadership, fair and shared structures, and well-being frameworks that reflect cultural and personal diversity. And here's the exciting part. When we get this right, we don't just improve well-being, we retain passionate, talented early years educators, the very people who shape the foundations of our children's learning and development. So let's move beyond tokenistic gestures and build environments where educators feel valued, supported, and inspired to stay in the profession. Because when we invest in their well-being, we invest in our children's future. Thank you for watching and for joining this important conversation on early years educators' well-being. Further details are provided in the appendices via the Padlet link, or scan this QR code to access it, while the full body of literature engaged with this study is listed in the references.